Let's just say, I'm not sure if we're live, so we're just doing a quick, the only way to check actually is if you're live is to look at the live feed. So we're just looking at YouTube and we're looking at Facebook, and I'm going to be here and I'm not going to utter a word in case something unspeakable is said. We're good? Yep. Okay. Can everyone hear us? Are we on Facebook? Yes. Well, I never. Okay, well, I'll start that whole introduction again because I was talking away furiously for about 10 minutes. I need to find that something had gone wrong. So, good evening. Thank you for joining us if you're watching now. Thank you for joining us. It is Christopher Daigen coming to you from our home. This is Saturday, the 15th of August. It's a beautiful day at KZN. And you are joining me for another in our lockdown series of live streams from our home in Pietermaritzburg. Christopher Daigen speaking. This is In Concert with Christopher Daigen. This is our live stream number 41, apparently. Well, it depends if you count the ones that no one has seen, or the ones that no one was supposed to see. I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a minute. So thank you for joining us tonight. Just the usual introductions. We are running obviously a little bit late. I was just talking for about 10 minutes, a few minutes ago, and then we realized that nothing was going out. There was a setting. We've managed to solve some of our problems. There was great celebration. Because of all this new equipment, we have new cameras and we have a new encoder and new lights, but some of these things are still trying to find their way how to talk to each other. It seems like a common problem in this part of the world. Everyone seems to not quite understand each other very well. I mean, we think that computers have a problem. We only have to look around us and see how we don't understand what each other is saying in many occasions. So, if you are joining us, please make yourself comfortable. Thank you to everyone who has supported us. Thank you to our very generous donors who have supported us generously with funds and donations towards this new equipment. For those of you who were watching last week, we had some very sluggish streams and we've had major problems. I mean, it has been unbelievably stressful. I've never been so stressed and exhausted and tired, just really struggling through all of this to try and find a way to work. But I will say a big thank you to all of those, especially on social media and those who've sent me WhatsApps. Social media is actually very interesting, especially with Facebook, that it's a possibility for people as a community to join together and comment and to discuss and see what other people are commenting. And I did post something on Friday. I'm not even sure what day I am anymore. Maybe Thursday. I think it was Thursday or Friday. It must have been Friday. And I said that I was trying very hard and we had a bit of a mishap with one of the live streams. And there were so many positive comments and were understanding of the situation. We are live streaming from home. This is not a professional TV studio. We are trying our best to make things work with new equipment. As I say, there are so many little issues that the various machines and equipment and encoders will or will not talk to each other. And I think we're actually getting it right. We solved one major problem. Now we were presented with another. And today at 4:30, the entire fiber connection that I have locally in the whole region disappeared. And the supplier said, no, the entire region's down. Could take hours or days. But in fact, it is back up. So we've got that. And apologies to anyone who did see that rather faulty live stream. It went out on Thursday when we found the magic moment and found the spark that actually kept everything together in a new way. Unbeknownst to me, and one of the perils of live streaming is we were not going only live to our private video setup, but the setup that I have is that it was streaming also live to 5 or 6 Facebook channels and to YouTube, unbeknownst to me. And yeah, it was a very interesting video. Nothing terribly unpleasant, but it was rather strange. And we weren't expecting for many people to see it, and didn't realize that many people could see it. And it was since deleted and it's gone. But if you did see that, apologies, and it's just part of the process. So we are here. I'm not quite sure. I've been flummoxed by the last few minutes of not being sure what's going to happen and how things are going to turn out. I'm just going to check that the piano's working. Yes, it does. That's the important part. And I'm here. Are we all ready to go? Is it 6 o'clock yet? It's gone 6, I think. 7 minutes past. Okay, I'm talking too much. Anyway, so thank you all for coming along, and now we know what the situation is. And let's get on with some music. So in this evening's program, I am going to compile a program of music, beautiful, it's always beautiful, but wonderful, interesting music by composers that I've linked together about various interesting stories and anecdotes. But I think before that, we need some music. I need to start with a piece of music, and I am going to play something. I'm not sure what it's going to be, but something will come to mind. I need just a few seconds to calm everything down. Is that going to be okay, Kevin? Celebrated opening prelude from the 48 Preludes and Fugues by Johann Sebastian Bach, also the basis for Ave Maria, which the French composer, mid-19th century composer Charles Gounod wrote the melody of Ave Maria over. So Ave Maria being a combination of Bach and Gounod. This evening's program being a combination of plan and spontaneity. I'm going to take it as it comes and just work through it as it goes through this evening, because I know that everyone's just here to relax and enjoy the music. So I mentioned in the program that there were various elements of interesting stories and facts that bring the program together. Our first section dealing with the composers Johann Sebastian Bach, who you've just heard from, George Frederick Handel, and Domenico Scarlatti, all born in the same year of 1685. A real miracle. It's incredible that these three major composers that are almost the sort of earliest and the first start of our piano music we play today, all born in exactly the same year. Just bizarre. The elements and the stories I'm going to tell you about the three composers all deal with aspects of travel. Bach was an incredibly enthusiastic and big-hearted young man who was always keen on an adventure. We have this idea that he was sort of very devout only and always only thinking about the purity of his life and the music which he produced, which is certainly an aspect of his music, but not everything. I always remind people Bach had 22 children, and he had a great zest for life and a great enthusiasm. And at one point when he was employed as the church organist, an official position in his early 20s at the Church of Arnstadt, he decided that he wanted to hear the great musician of the time, Buxtehude, play the organ. Buxtehude was admired and seen as one of the great musicians of the day. And Bach was very, very keen to hear him and to meet him. So he gained permission from the church authorities and had the opportunity to visit where Buxtehude was touring and playing nearby or working nearby. And he had a 4-week leave of absence, if that's I think that's the correct term. What's amazing about it is that Bach went on foot. He walked for 400 kilometers. It was a journey of 400 kilometers to hear this musician that he undertook on foot, which is amazing. And I don't think he was in his Nike Airs either. He was probably in some very uncomfortable shoes. Which it's an amazing story. I mean, this man who was so inspired and so determined to hear this musician play that he walked for 400 kilometers. Anyway, apparently he met Buxtehude and they had such a great time. Buxtehude, they probably played music together. Bach played apparently in the orchestra that Buxtehude was conducting or working with at the time. He even offered Bach his daughter's hand in marriage. Bach declined. And Bach had such a good time that 4 months later, not 4 weeks later, he was still there and he was still enjoying himself. And so it's a really fascinating story that shows the enthusiasm of Bach and this determination to travel over such a great distance. Bach eventually did come back, and I'm not quite sure if I've got this part of the story right, but the church authorities were not impressed, and he was called in for a meeting and disciplinary action, even in those days. And Bach wasn't very impressed by this. I mean, it's amazing having Bach as your church organist, improvising and creating music for your services on a weekly basis whenever it was required. And Bach didn't take to this kindly, and so one of the weeks, this is the part I'm not quite sure of, I read this somewhere, but when I went to look for it, I couldn't find it again, that Bach was a bit upset. And so one of the following Sunday mornings, he decided to take a bit of a chance and wasn't looking forward to going to work to play on his Sunday morning service, and decided to ease his way into the situation by visiting a wine shop on the way. And so he arrived at the church not quite in the best, or in the very good spirits, should I say, not quite in the appropriate spirits, but in the best spirits, and played terribly and abominably, and eventually was dismissed, and he was very pleased to be away from that situation. So I'm going to play a piece of music by Bach. The second story I'd like to tell you about that has to deal with travel is, in fact, by the composer George Frederick Handel that I mentioned. So Handel, also born not far away from where Bach was, although they never met. Handel at some point decided to go to Italy, and he came back to Germany and was in the court employment of the Elector of Hanover and was on a contract to work there. And Handel had been to England before, but decided that he wanted, on one of his trips to England, he was just going to stay there and never go back. And he was having such a good time, he just didn't go back. He moved permanently to England and just abandoned his position at the court in the city of Hanover by a rather unfortunate and weird political move. The next king of England happened to be his previous employer and became George I of England with the marrying of the Hanover court and the family, the royal family of England. And suddenly Handel found himself in England with his not so happy previous employer, now the King of England, and his current employer. And part of the reason, or part of the way that he apparently managed to placate the king in his not so exemplary behavior in this matter, was to write the water music. Which of course the king liked very much, especially when it was played on various barges on the Thames as the king wandered up and down, and it was a big success. Of course, I remember that for some reason, and it just shows you how these things stick in your mind, as the advert on South African movies, when you went to the movies and you went to the screen open and you had adverts, and that was for smoking Dunhill, the house of royal pleasure, and Handel's music blared forth with that exact piece. So I am going to play you a piece not of that, but actually another very beautiful piece of music from his opera, Rinaldo Lascia Kyokpanga. A wonderful piece of music again. Handel wrote some beautiful keyboard music, but I'm going to play something which he didn't write for keyboard, which is just a wonderfully exciting moment. restful moment. And the third interesting story about these composers was Scarlatti, who was Italian by birth, who was a very fated composer in Italy, took up a court position in Portugal at the royal house, the royal court there, teaching Maria Barbara, a very talented harpsichordist, very talented student. And again, he followed her wherever she went, and she married into the Spanish royal house and eventually became Queen Barbara of Spain. And so Scarlatti kept composing, and in the last 25 years of his life he spent in Spain composing for her, and that's where the majority of his 500 short sonatas for Queen Maria Barbara of Spain were composed. And so the sonata I'm going to play for you from the Handel's selection there is in fact the sonata in E major, which has this very relaxed, sunny, royal atmosphere of court majesty. So first of all, a prelude by J.S. Bach from his Partita No. 1, my little version of Handel's Lascia Chiappanga from his opera Rinaldo, and ending off with the sonata in E major, K380 by Domenico Scarlatti. ending that selection there of three pieces, the Sonata in E major, K380 by Domenico Scarlatti, I'm sure inspired by the royal courts of Madrid as his student Maria Barbara, Queen Maria Barbara, was playing and being composed for by the composer Scarlatti himself. Before that, Lascia Cupanga from the Rinaldo by Handel, and starting off that set of three, the opening introduction of Prelude from J.S. Bach. I apologize that we don't have little titles with all the compositions. We're changing over from formats, computer formats, and with lots of new things for us to learn, lots of new exciting platforms and elements for us to conquer and discover. Each time it's a whole new program and everything's got a whole manner and a way of its own. So the titles are going to come, but unfortunately the system we were using is no longer possible. Not going to happen, not now. So we hope you are enjoying the beautiful pictures. Is the picture looking good? Is it going out beautifully and the sound is good? Yes, so we seem to have conquered that. No more lagging motion. I'm not moving around quickly. I'm still over there when actually I'm here. That was a real problem, and it's all happening together. So thank you, Kevin, and also my partner Barry, who's been deserved double gold medals for being determined the last 10 days. They just have, none of us have given up, just been trying again and again. And as I say, we probably test and trial number 352, not just 2 this evening. We've been having a good old go at it, just trying to make it work. On with the music. Stories, number 2. So I'm going to move on to 2 composers and how they gave concerts, interesting events. The first of which, Ludwig van Beethoven. And I'm going to talk about a very interesting concert, which I've lost my notes, apparently took place on the 22nd of December, 1808. Beethoven decided that he wanted to stage a public concert in Vienna, which was going to promote some of his new compositions. And it's very interesting for me to read about this because as a concert entrepreneur and someone who presents and stages concerts, there's so many mitigating circumstances in the background one doesn't think about and really take into account up front. And in Beethoven's day, it was no different. There were only a number of theaters that were available, that were possible to have these public concerts, and the time limit was of great critical importance because there were 2 or 3 orchestras in Vienna at the time that were attached usually to the courts. And during the summer, the royalty, the aristocracy would disappear out of Vienna and go into their country houses, their country homes, as one does. And of course, all the musicians would go with to play for the parties. So suddenly, there were no orchestras. When the orchestras were in town, they were very much sought after and very busy preparing concerts for the day, or the opera of the day, which was where everyone gathered and what was the normal social and artistic prize that people were preparing and presenting in a musical sense, opera. So the orchestra was always busy performing and rehearsing for those, including in those venues. So there were only 2 periods of the year during Advent and Lent when in fact concerts were allowed or where it was possible. And of course the pressure for various musicians and composers to want to stage their own music was high, and Beethoven eventually managed to secure a date to present his concert. And of course it was fraught with difficulties. The soprano that he was going to be included in the performance, he insulted. He said something dreadful to her and she left. So another replacement came in who was very young and got terrible stage fright and sung very poorly. The orchestra musicians were under-rehearsed. They didn't have time to rehearse the music properly. And I mean, nowadays, orchestras have all played these great Beethoven works. Everyone knows these pieces backwards. But you can imagine being at the very first performance. And Beethoven's music is very complicated and dense and always difficult for an orchestra. So to be facing with this handwritten scores to produce these pieces for the very first time must have really been quite taxing. Anyway, the night came. It was incredibly cold. Another terrible thing working against Beethoven. And there was an audience. Now, what was also fascinating for me is the aristocracy were generally the audience. There was a very small working class of 2.5%, they've estimated, middle class at least, who would have possibly bought a ticket for one of these concerts, and a ticket would have set you back the equivalent of a week's wages. So you really had to want to go to buy this ticket if you were going to go to a performance like this. The performance consisted of the Fifth Symphony, movements from the Mass in C major with choir and orchestra, the entire Fourth Piano Concerto, which is quite a program. It's quite a big and substantial program, even by today's measure and today's normal concertizing standards. However, that was only the first half of the program. After interval, there was the Sixth Symphony. Beethoven extemporized a grand improvisation. There were more music from the Mass, and then they ended off with an amazing work which he wrote, the Fantasia in C for the choir, orchestra, and solo piano, the Choral Fantasy as it's known. So I mean, this concert went on for 4.5 or 5 hours in the cold, and of course everyone struggled. And I'm not sure if it was really a success for Beethoven. It was probably the last major public performance he gave as a pianist. His encroaching deafness was really becoming a problem. But it really gives us a sense of how he struggled, even on his own terms, to perform and present his own music and the difficult circumstances that it must have entailed. And to rehearse all of this, the choir, the orchestra, all these brand new works which he had just written, apparently, again, under rehearsal, the Choral Fantasy, the performance actually ground to a halt at some point, and he had to restart the performance, which the orchestra were not terribly happy about. But I'm going to play for you a piece of music, not from that, but it's a piece of music which has been requested by both Kevin and my partner Barry, who've been working so hard, from the Sonata Opus 27, which is just a very amazing piece, but I think it also gives us a sense of the power of what improvisation that Beethoven would have played sounded like. And straight after that, a second short piece by Franz Schubert. As opposed to all these great concerts which Beethoven played, Schubert's reputation really rested on his work as a composer, and apparently he only played one major concert in his entire life. It was a very short life. But majority of Schubert's music was performed in small house concerts, probably very much like I do. Many of them are concerts in my own home. And it brings me to this idea that, in fact, many people on stage, a mass of orchestra musicians, choir and soloists, and a mass in the orchestra. It's a very different musical experience from just a few people sitting around a piano with just one or two people playing. And it's a very unique contrast, and it also brings into highlight for me the relationship and the experience of how these lockdown live stream sessions are working, because while many people are watching them, everyone is watching them in isolation. And it's a very interesting mode of communication for me, that everyone has their own personal relationship with the music and the presentation. So this is the second movement from the Sonata Opus 27, number 1 by Beethoven, followed by the Moment Musical, number 3 by Franz Schubert. that last composition I just decided to add in. It's my show. I think I can make the choice. I didn't expect to play that, but I added that in. It's such a great piece. Schubert's Hungarian Melody, rarely played piece. Well, I play it quite often. And it's a really wonderful composition, probably composed when Schubert himself was on one of those holiday periods at the courts, being the court musician, the entertainment, the hired help, I guess, at one of the palaces of the aristocracy who were escaping Vienna during the hot, dry summers. Before that, you heard the Moment Musical No. 3 by Schubert, and before that, the second movement of the Beethoven Sonata, Opus 27, No. 1 in E-flat major. Those pieces, I think, gave a very interesting concept, a contrast about how the concertizing norms of the two composers and their styles differed and how they fitted together. So I'm going to move on now to a set of 4 composers, interesting little stories and anecdotes around the theme of, did they really say that, or did that really happen? And it's actually just some very interesting and some quite fun, some quite unfortunate things actually here and there. And I'm going to start off with the composer Robert Schumann. Now, Schumann's music is very in the moment, and certainly in the early part of his life, when he composed magnificent amounts of music inspired by the love for his piano teacher's daughter, Clara. And one of the great compositions, one of the greatest, and I think the most Schumannesque or the most unique pieces that really gives us an idea of how Schumann in his essence, and really in his essence, feels and expresses his music, was a set called Kreisleriana, a set of 8 pieces, 8 fantasies he called them. He composed this entire set, about a 30-minute work in 4 days in a fit of inspiration. It is, the Kreisler refers to the story by E.T.A. Hoffmann, I think it is, of a fictitious music master, a music composer and musician, Mr. Kreisler, who was obsessed about music and whose music was his life. And I think Schumann saw something in this and was inspired by it. Now, he composes his most perfect, heartfelt, sincere, the passion of the music, you'll see the piece that I'm going to play for you, is incredible. And he decides to dedicate it to a musician that he had held as a genius in Schumann's writing. He used to write enormous amounts in the journal and publications about other composers. And he said when Chopin published his Opus 2, very early work, he said, "Hats off, gentlemen, this is a genius." He called Chopin a genius, which is incredible. Incredible sign of respect and positive affirmation from one composer to another. So Schumann composes Kreisleriana, sends Chopin the score, beautifully printed. This is his composition. This I am dedicating to you, my greatest, most personal work. Chopin was never a very, how should I say, generously spirited person. He's always, I think, a little bit self-conscious and a little bit cautious about many things. He responded to Schumann, the letter, "Thank you for the dedication. The layout on the artwork on the first page, the dedication page, is very nice. Thank you." End of story. And, well, I mean, that's really a bit mean when someone's dedicated an entire great composition to you, and the best thing that you can comment on is how it's printed on the paper. Not the best response. Anyway, Chopin himself, I am fascinated by how his reception, his life was received, and how he performed, also mainly in small drawing room situations. And one of the most, I wouldn't say it's tragic, comical, it's just one of the most extraordinary situations arose when Chopin visited England in his later years, and he played at Buckingham Palace, amazingly enough. And in Queen Victoria's diary, she writes, "Grand festive occasion. It was such a marvelous party," something I'm making it up, "such a marvelous party. Lord so-and-so was having a great time, and lady, we were having jolly old time and dancing, and we were just having the best time ever. It was enjoyable and magnificent. Everyone was on top form." and some Polish pianist played the piano. She said that was her entry of the diary. Some Polish pianist. That happened to be Chopin. In her defense, he was playing in another room, sort of adjacent to where she was, and at a Polish fundraising for refugees, apparently. And that was how Chopin was received at Buckingham Palace. So 2 little pieces for you. The first of which, well, not little, the first of which, the opening number of Kreiseriana. It's one of my favorite pieces of music. I really love to play this whole set. And following that, a mazurka, a traditional Polish dance by Frédéric Chopin. two pieces there, the Mazurka Opus 67 by Frédéric Chopin, a mazurka that was published after Chopin's death, found amongst his private papers, and possibly that have some very personal significance to him. And before that, the opening number of Kreiseriana by Robert Schumann, a work that Schumann dedicated to Chopin, who didn't seem to show much interest, never played it, never taught it, never played any of Schumann's music at least, and was not terribly enthusiastic in his response. Rather odd. Moving on to two composers contemporary of Schumann and Chopin, Franz Liszt, a great 19th century pianist, one of the great musicians, a groundbreaking musician of new ideas, new techniques in composition, possibly the most brilliant pianist of all time, a great star of the stage, an innovator, philanthropist, such an incredible personality. And Liszt in his life drew a great deal of admiration, and there's so many stories about Liszt and people who followed Liszt, but the one which I think is rather funny was Liszt was a real star, a star of the stage in his time, and was revered and followed around wherever he went. And one day a young woman saw Liszt, the great pianist, visiting a city, and saw Liszt crossing the road casually in the middle of the town. And as he crossed the road, he threw his cigar butt down into the gutter, discarded it, and off he walked. And she was absolutely enthralled. This was her prize. This was her Liszt artifact that she would then claim and be able to tell people that she had seen Liszt himself. And apparently, she kept it until the day that she died, this discarded cigar butt in a locket around her neck. And everywhere she went, she had this for the rest of her life, had this rather unfortunate odor of stale tobacco smoke, which followed her around, and it was found in her locket, as I say, after her death. She was such a star during his day. And one of the interesting things, but I'd say all these elements about Liszt, the celebrity, the composition, the music, he composed this fantastically in a brilliant work, the Sonata in B minor, a piece of music which really encapsulates all the ideas about 19th century music in one composition. And at one of the very first performances, not even a public performance, a private performance, he met Johannes Brahms, the composer. Johannes Brahms was invited, along with Clara Schumann, to hear Liszt and to meet Liszt. And Liszt announced to the small gathering that he was going to play his brand new piano sonata in B minor. Now, as I say, this is now regarded as one of the pivotal works of the 19th century. It really brings everything together into one unit. Everything about Liszt, everything about the performance, the programs, the idea of stories and music, the composition. And Liszt plays this piece for this very select audience, including Brahms. And what does Brahms do? Brahms falls asleep. He fell asleep, and it was noticed by everyone. Liszt in particular was not particularly impressed, and Brahms said, oh, well, he'd been traveling all day, and he was terribly tired. Brahms was never a fan of Liszt's music or of Liszt's style of composing or anything, I think, to do with Liszt. So it was one of those rather rare moments where I think it would have been good for him just to stay awake somehow, but he actually snoozed his way through the first performance of Liszt's B minor sonata. And the last little anecdote, I think, which is quite funny about Brahms, apart from the fact he was an incredibly private person, he was once asked, like Liszt was very famous, and a young woman asked him to sign a photograph of Brahms. Ran up to him and says, please, Mr. Brahms, sign my photograph, please write a message. And Brahms wrote, scribble, scribble, scribble. A few minutes later, he was still scribbling and he was still writing. And here, all they were expecting was a simple autograph. And eventually, he handed it, the photograph, or the paper, to the young woman. And he had written out a whole piece of music. He had written the music notes and the clefs and the whole music, the opening bars. And it sounded like this. And underneath it, he wrote, unfortunately not by Mr. Brahms. Of course, that being the opening notes of Johann Strauss's Blue Danube, all the rage in Vienna at the time, and I'm sure Brahms was quite envious of the attention and certainly the financial gains that came from this. So two pieces I'm going to play for you to end off this evening's session. The Consolation, a beautiful, restful Consolation by Franz Liszt, the third of the 6 consolations, and to end off on a super fitting piece Brahms's lullaby or cradle song that would certainly lull him or anyone else to sleep. So don't please go to sleep now. Liszt and Brahms to end this evening's program. the celebrated Lullaby, Cradle Song by Johannes Brahms, an inspiration for Brahms to fall asleep again, I'm sure, during any of Liszt's performances. And before that, Liszt himself, and the Consolation Number 3, a very beautiful, I think a very magnificent piece of music by Franz Liszt that shows something of the delicacy, generosity, concise nature, quite different to some of the very grand and brilliant outgoing music that Liszt is often associated, normally associated with. He's a really fascinating character, one of the most unique personalities, I think, of the 19th century. That brings an end to this evening's performance of Christopher Deigen in concert on Saturday evening. Thank you for joining us. We hope you've enjoyed the music, the selection. If you are able to support us, please do carry on. There are many people who are giving me weekly, monthly support, as well as a number of people who are giving me very meaningful, generous support for the equipment. We're still trying to get to the bottom of the problems. It's not perfect. We're still experiencing some technical issues trying to figure out. We've got brand new cameras, brand new video decoder, and I hate to say it, but I think the problem, which we are not experiencing this evening because we have a different computer, is the fact that my computer, which runs my entire business, I mean, I always joke that I spend more time at the computer keyboard these days than I do at the piano keyboard, because of all the emails, the internet, the Facebook, the advertising, the publicity, everything happens via the computer, and my very trusty and very wonderful Mac is over 10 years old. And as with all technology, it's wonderful, but it keeps changing and it keeps updating. So when you buy a whole lot of new equipment, and the principal element which is bringing it all together is still stuck 10 years ago, I think that's what is what might be causing the problems. Anyway, thank you for joining us tonight. I hope the stream has gone successfully, that the images have been beautiful, and the music has been lovely. I hope the sound has been fantastic. I hope you're all well. Please keep looking after yourself. Please keep your messages coming in on Facebook. It's really wonderful to see all the comments and where everyone is watching from and how you're experiencing it. And it's really very positive for all of us involved to experience and to be able to read these messages to see what it actually means to all of you. If you'd like to WhatsApp or email, of course, that is also very possible. You'll find all the information at my website, and we will make sure, I'm pretty sure by next Wednesday, if everything goes well, we'll have all the titles and all better details of the compositions up on the screen for you for every piece of music that I play. We postponed the session from last Wednesday of What Am I Listening To? And so I'm hoping to do that this coming Wednesday, detailing all these various elements of composers and dates and details and keys and opus numbers and adagios, allegros, first movement, second movement, etc. I'll be able to give you a complete overview of all of that, and you'll get it all sorted out so you'll know exactly what everyone is talking about from there on. So join us on Wednesday, please, at 6 p.m. for our next session. Stay well, look after yourself, and thank you for spending this time with us. Thank you to Kevin Liddell once again for his technical support and for seeing us through. See you then.